I'll be honest, the other thing I see a lot is people reading stuff wrong. And you see a lot of people do what they did the last time because it worked.
Howard Croston is the global brand business manager at Pure Fishing, the owners of Hardy Greys, and he started fishing as a youngster with his dad on the rivers of the English Lake District. He has now climbed the ranks of competitive river fly fishing, becoming individual world champion in Tasmania in 2019. A tremendous achievement. Please join me as I get to pick the brains of a phenomenal angler. Howard, welcome to Fishing Discoveries, and thanks ever so much for jumping on the call tonight.
No, cheers, Paul. Thanks for having me.
I believe that you've managed to finally scratch that itch and get out and do a bit of fishing today as well, which is a nice bit of news.
Yeah, I got out. I got out today for should we say, more than a few hours. So that was good. Did a few miles, caught a few fish. So it was a good day, to be honest. Good day.
Lovely stuff. Yeah, yeah. No, it's good. It's good to see. I think just being able to indulge in and get back outdoors and get back at it. I
Yeah.
often ask. One of the first questions I often ask people that I've had on here, and I'm always curious to know: do you remember when you got into fishing? When it all started for you? Can you remember your first fish or your first fishing experiences and how that all came about?
I'll be honest. I can't remember. I can't remember physically the first fish I caught, but I can remember very, very clearly when I went from being a fisherman who basically fished with anything to catch fish to 100% being a fly angler.
Right. Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, which was quite a weird experience, to be honest, because it was something I've never seen since to this day. But I
Mm.
used to bait fish when I was a kid, and I used to catch quite a lot of fish with, should we say, nefarious means as well as legal ones. And I was fishing one day with a spinning rod, as you do, and I think I was using sweet corn at the time and catching a few trout.
Mm.
And there was I can remember there being like a huge commotion in the river, and there was all these fish just like smashing something off the surface, just actually feeding off the top. And they were actually eating, I think from memory, it was wasps that were dropping out of a wasp's nest
No way. Okay.
in a tree. And I charged up and got me what sort of passed as the fly rod, which was a spinning rod, but it was one of those old yellow fiberglass ones, and you could slide the reel seat to the bottom like a fly rod.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Was
sort of
it
fly
solid
fishing
glass? Did you go old school with a solid glass, or was it tubular? Can you remember?
horrific. Yeah, it was bright yellow with a plastic bright yellow handle.
I think I had a very similar rod, almost the same on. He's practicing in the back garden with it. Yeah, it's like like almost like a fluted yellow plastic handle.
That was it. With the like grooves down it, and
Yeah,
yeah, it was one of those. It was one of
same.
those,
There
and
you go.
yeah, and I caught what then were big fish for me. I caught two on a something that looked roughly like what they were eating off the top, and that was it.
Mm.
That was
And at that time, did you have any mentors, or were you mainly kind of like yourself taught, or what was the driver there really?
yeah. So my dad was always a fisherman, obviously, and he was a course fisherman. He was a really good course fisherman
Mm.
when he used to match fish, and then he sort of, because you couldn't really bait fish where we were fishing. My parents bought a holiday home in the Lake District, and
Mm.
more of a fly fishing kind of place. So my dad was still doing a bit of course fishing, and but he started to get into having a go with a fly rod. And my uncle said he was a fly fisherman.
Mm.
So just sort of between those two, that's how I sort of got my foot in the door in terms of fishing. And then yeah, as soon as I had a bit of an aptitude for casting for some reason.
Mm.
Once my dad had sort of recognised that, then he sort of started taking me for, I got proper casting lessons, I got a proper fly rod,
Mm.
and then I was very fortunate after that. I had quite a fortunate path, if you like, through fly fishing.
Fantastic. And I sort of wondered as well whether I mean, you've described yourself as, a fairly competitive sort of person in the past. I wonder whether the competitive element in your fly fishing, at what stage that came in, or is that it's just something that's always been there?
I'll be honest. I was a tournament. I used to tournament cast. That was the first thing that I did, and
Right.
I was
Okay.
really into tournament casting, particularly what they call precision. It used to be called precision. It's just called accuracy now.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of domestic competitions all up and down the UK. I won quite a lot of them,
Mm.
and then I got a chance to go to the World Championships in the late '90s. And back then there was no. The British Casting Association was defunct. There was no structure in place, but I'd just started working at John Norris in Penrith,
Mm.
and they decided to reinstate the BCA so that I could enter a World Championships. And I went to Nova Zamke in Czechoslovakia, I think it was, or Slovakia. It might be. I think it was still Czechoslovakia then.
Yeah.
And I did the World Championships there, and I trained for a year solid, and basically didn't fish. So I really didn't enjoy that year particularly. All I was doing was standing on a playing field.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I got all the way over there, and then one thing happened, something else happened, and I didn't get a good qualifying result, and I didn't make the final cut. So I'd basically given up a year of fishing to be
Mm.
sort of done over by the wind, because you have little wind meters, and all of my group didn't qualify because the wind was right on the limit. So I just decided then that I'd had enough of tournament casting, and a year after sort of got into competition fishing. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's as simple as that, really. Just switching one for the other.
Yeah, I was competitive, and somebody said, "Oh, there's a rivers qualifier," and I was like, "A what?" And then like, "Well, there's a qualifier to get into the final to make the England team, and it's up on the Tweed and the Teviot," and so I just entered, and I'd actually never fished the Tweed and the Teviot before. I'd never been up there,
Mm.
so I
Mm.
drove up and entered it. Went to the car park, said to somebody, "Can you the car park you had to sign in at?" I said, "Can you point me to to the river, or to get to it?" And they said, "Oh, well, it's up there," and blah blah blah. So I went, and I managed to win it, which was a bit of a miracle. I mean, I only caught two, but it was enough. And then I thought, "Oh, this is interesting." So then that was it. Then I started.
You can compete and get to fish at at the same time. You
Yeah,
don't
I
stand on a
thought,
playing field.
this is good. I quite like it. So that
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
then. Yeah.
Nice. And so, obviously, over the time, just as anglers anyway, you always accumulate a ton of knowledge. But particularly being exposed to international competition, the amount of, like, I'd say, like a series of like mini epiphanies, if you like, that you inevitably kind of come across. That's almost a given, I expect. But has there been through your time? Has there been particular like real paradigm shifts that have really, like a real jump forward in either your understanding or your results on the basis of one particular big epiphany or a series of those kind of things, or is it literally just that accumulation of small bits of knowledge over time?
I'll be honest. For me, I think it's been accumulation. Um, I mean, there's been certain things where I've suddenly gone, well, actually, I used to think that really mattered, and now I know that it absolutely doesn't,
Mm,
and
mm,
and vice versa. And there's been odd ones, there's been odd moments like that when I've thought, why haven't you just been doing this all along?
yeah,
So there's been odd ones, but I mean, I'll be honest, I've been really fortunate, because when I did get into the kind of fishing thing, just the path that my sort of fishing career sort of took, you know, literally 15 minutes away from my house, Malcolm Greenhalgh lived.
yeah,
And, Malcolm got hold of me when I was quite young, and basically, I was in his living room in his kitchen one afternoon, and he's showing me how to tie cul de canards that he'd just got off Mark Pettijohn literally the week before.
mm,
And I'm fishing with these things which pretty much nobody else had really seen at that point. I mean, they were around, but, Mark Pettijohn was a real driving force for it for over
yeah,
here. And so, I had that, and then I met Oliver Edwards because I was working at John Norris's a few years later, and we had Oliver come in. I got friendly with Oliver, and I learned a lot off him. And then, and I've just sort of always been quite lucky in sort of like the people I've rubbed shoulders with, and
I
that
think
sort of leapfrogged me.
Yeah, I think there's an element of, though, if you're obsessed enough and you're into stuff enough, that you end up having those opportunities because you just end up in the same sort of circles and trying to chase down the same kind of questions as people. So you, in a bit of a way, I do think you build your own luck just by being so into something that you can't help sort of making those connections, I think. And I do think that's a great thing about fishing as well, because it's very difficult to go and get a kick around in the park with David Beckham, but in fishing you can potentially, meet those people and get on the river with them, or exchange flies and that kind of thing. So I think it's a
Yeah,
great thing about our sport.
yeah, no, I think you're right. I think you're right. To be honest, when I think about it, but
Mm.
yeah, I mean, I've picked bits up from everybody I've ever fished with, and a lot of them not even competition anglers.
Yeah,
I've
yeah. So I'm at the risk of putting you on the spot, but you said there's one or two things you'd said, "Oh, I should have been doing that all along. Why didn't I do that?" Can you think of any specific instances of that where you've just completely shelved something as a a dead end?
um, I mean, I've been in the past. I've probably been guilty, like a lot of us are, of overcomplicating things,
Mm.
and I've I've learned through a lot of the competition fishing I've done that if you get the things that make a difference right, the other stuff really just pales away into being
Yeah,
pretty much insignificant. So for me, it took me quite a while to realize that why you've got a box full of really intricate, nice looking flies that when you pick them up you think, oh, that's gonna work. You know, if you've got more flies in different weights and sizes of something that works anyway, you tend to fish better.
yeah,
Rather
yeah.
than having this big multitude of bizarre flies that really are nothing more than just plain to fly tying.
Yeah. See, for me, I think that is this. You ought to strive for simplicity, but it needs to be the simplicity that's on the far side of something complex. You can't just immediately just pluck that out of thin air. I think it's what you whittle down with experience, and you almost have to go through that complexity to work out what's important. So it's that idea of, I forget who said it. Somebody far more intelligent and famous than I am said, I'd give my left arm for the simplicity that's on the far side of complexity, but I wouldn't give a fig for the simplicity this side of complexity. So I personally, I think there's a lot to that in fly fishing, and I guess it chimes with what you were saying there, really.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I'm really grateful for having gone through, because I went through a phase where I tied every single fly in Oliver's book. And Oliver's a
Mm,
really good friend of mine, and I've been very grateful for everything I've learned off him over the years. And I still fish with him now. I fished with him last year, which had
mm,
been the first time for a few years, to be honest.
yeah.
But he's still getting out there, and you know, I learned a lot off him, which I would now not be without, even for competition fishing.
Mm,
That makes sense.
yeah.
Although my box isn't full of articulated stonefly nymphs anymore like it used to be,
Yeah.
you know, I've still got a few, and I know that if I see stoneflies coming off. I was in the US for the Worlds a few years ago, and there were stoneflies kicking around, and I caught an odd fish on an ollie type stonefly nymph.
Mm, mm,
So it's I'm grateful for having gone through that part, but I've sort of now, in my own mind at least, got it simplified things a little bit more for
yeah.
myself. I think.
Yeah. So it's functional patterns, I suppose, isn't it? Really, that's the watchword, isn't it? It's not necessarily what you think would work, or that the entomologist would necessarily say would work. It's what matters to the fish, and it's paring it down to that and having a functional definition of it. So how, for instance, if the fish accepts it as food, it's then, like you were saying before, if you've got it in different weights, you can get it to the level in the water that the fish will accept it without having to move too far for it. So just having that pattern in the right weight is more important than having seven different patterns that might trigger off a response on a different day, sort of thing. So
Yeah, yeah. For me, that's what I tend to strive for now. Is relatively simple flies in more weights and more sizes.
mm,
And I'll be honest, I like them simple because if you put a lot of time into a fly, you're less likely to risk firing it into somewhere where you're not going to get it back.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And when I'm comp fishing or whatever, I fire it absolutely everywhere.
yeah, yeah,
So I don't care if I lose it.
Yeah, yeah.
Really, no.
It's well consumables, aren't they? You know, it's ammo.
Yeah, yeah.
Fantastic. So when you are out on stream and you see other anglers out and about, what the most common or the biggest mistakes you see people making, or mistakes is probably a strong word, the ways that people hold themselves back that you can sort of see quite obviously, what do you think the most common examples of that are that you come across?
Probably one, and I've seen I've seen it today, unfortunately, is approach. I mean, I've been on the river today. I'll not name which one, but it's below, it's way below summer level already, and I mean, there's nothing there. It's like damp rock,
Yeah.
which is worrying. But there's still quite a lot of fish there. I had a dozen today. I had 10 on dries, couple on nymphs. But there was a guy who came down the bank in front of me, and I watched him. He was quite a long way upstream, but bolt upright, right the way down, stood at the edge of the streamline where the water started, and then started casting cross current with what looked like a dry dropper or duo kind of thing. And he's just basically swinging it downstream in totally void water, and so approach is one of the biggest things I see that people botch, basically.
I suppose one of the pet things I end up writing about it a lot and getting on my soapbox about it is that a lot of the stuff that is published is about the sexy part of fly fishing, which is like, the imitation, the flies and that kind of thing. But nobody's ever caught a spook fish ever in fly fishing. If you spook a fish, it's never going to take a fly, or at least if you're lucky, you might leave it for half an hour and it might come back on the feed again. But at that moment, you forget it. It doesn't matter what fly you've got on. And there's not so much written about that aspect of it, I think. So,
No, approach is a big one. And I'll be honest, the other thing I see a lot is people reading stuff wrong. And you see a lot of people do what they did the last time because it worked.
Yeah.
And fish move, and they sit in different places, and different things trigger them to sit in different places. And, I see a lot of people leave fish behind or spook fish that they don't even know are there because they're too busy getting to the next rock where where they were last time.
Yeah. Cool. So if you had an ideal day's fishing, if there was a river anywhere in the world at the right time of the season for that particular river, what might be a few good contenders for that for you? For pleasure fishing, shall we say?
I'll be honest, it's really difficult for me to pin it down because I've been really lucky and I've fished loads of awesome places.
Yeah.
I mean, I love going out west in the US.
John Shane said I should ask you about Wyoming and and the rivers out there.
I mean, some of the fishing out there is just off the charts. It's stupid good. Even with the amount of angling pressure that they have, there's still so much to go at.
I mean, I've seen some of the stats of like the fish per mile on some of those rivers, and it seems almost unbelievable in a sense. But yeah,
it's ridiculous. I mean, I was over on. I love the Madison. The Madison's one of my favorite rivers, just because it's basically nymphing paradise. I mean,
yeah.
You can't go wrong with it. And I was over there in, I think it was October and November, and I only fished for something like 3.5 days. I was there for work, and I managed to add in like 3.5 days of off time over a weekend and a half day before I flew out. And I had something like about 320 fish. I mean, it was just ridiculous, and that's in the off season. That's not in a brilliant time of year.
Yeah. And so, given a choice between nymphs and dries, or is it just whatever the fish are doing at the time? Do you have a preference, or?
I love all methods of fishing. I'll be honest. I like sight nymphing whenever I can do it. So I like to sight nymph fish rather than, if I had the choice between throwing a nymph at one and watching it eat it and throwing a dry at one and watching it eat it, I'd normally prefer to throw the nymph at it.
Yeah.
Because I think it's more difficult in a lot of ways.
You got 3 dimensions going on, haven't you, for a start, which is
and I like sight nymphing to fish. I do.
Fantastic. There is a story. I don't know how true it is, but hey, why let the truth get in the way of a good story? But there was a tale that I heard about Pascal Cognard in some. I think the basic, and I might get some of the details wrong, but the basic setup was that he drew kind of like the section of death that nobody caught a fish on in the entire competition. Everybody had been through it and just sort of combed it in inch wide sort of drifts with like the tiniest nymphs, and they'd really assiduously covered it, and nobody had been able to catch a fish out of it. And the story goes that he basically sat down on the bank at the start of his session and then waited until like beyond halfway into that session, went to a particular spot, made not more than half a dozen casts and caught like 2 fish, and then by dint of that just slaughtered everybody else. And that impressed me on a number of levels, if it's true. But I've come into contact with people that I've fished around him, so it is perfectly believable, because he seems to have a very good understanding of just what makes fish tick and the biology, and what a piece of water is capable of giving him. But I just wondered if you had any similar comp stories where you'd felt you'd really read something spot on and it all came together, and obviously there's a great satisfaction on that. But I just wondered if you had any sort of personal stories where you just nailed it and it just went the way the script was supposed to go.
There's been a few. I think probably one of the most recent ones was we've got this new EPP system now we've had for the last few years, and the first year we had the EPP, we had a session down on the test, which was really hard fishing. It was on a bit of water that's really heavily fished, and it was pegged, and they pegged it really short. They were very short pegs. And you only had like an hour, I think it was, on each peg, and a lot of it was blank avoidance. And I can't remember whether I didn't blank or I only had one blank, but I think I won that one. I'm pretty sure I won that one. Yeah, I did, and it was the tactic was actually not dissimilar. I hadn't heard that story about Pascal, to be honest. I don't actually know him. I know a lot of the guys out the current French team, but not that many of the older
Yeah,
guys.
because I think he'd had enough, hadn't he? Sort of a number of years ago now, probably late 90s.
Yeah,
or so.
I think
early 2000s. Sorry, yeah.
I think winning it 3 times is being greedy. Personally, I'm quite
just
happy with
showing
once. So yeah, and down there on the test, basically I did something very similar. There was a guy fishing in front of me because we were fishing immediately behind each other.
Yeah.
And he was wading all over the place. So most of my beats, I just sat on the bank.
Yeah.
Till we were 30 minutes in and then fished, and I managed to get more or less one fish out of every single session.
Yeah, so no blanks. Yeah.
So
it's interesting, though, isn't it? I think for people that not necessarily into the sort of competition side of things, that previously, I guess, in a lot of the domestic qualifiers, you would have the opportunity to basically, if you machine gunned it and if you covered loads more water than other people, you could probably build a big enough total to win. But that idea of having a limited section of water that you have to make the best of, that's much more similar to what you get in the Worlds, isn't it, really? That sort of really sort of trying to get the most out of a particular piece of river, and it's a different set of tactics, I guess.
Oh yeah, it's my biggest bugbear with the old system. I mean, we fished home internationals, and we've got some superb anglers at that format. But unfortunately, then when you go to a world or a European where it's a pegged format, that it just doesn't cut it. You've got to get good at fishing pegs. You have to fish pegs. That's a fact, and I'd argue that with anybody.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've spent a lot of time looking at the results over the years, and I've noticed that a lot of our anglers, typically, not all of them, but a lot of them, have had their best results in the latter part of the career, which has been when they've got more pegged hours.
Yeah.
So
I think there's a saying about you can't really rise to the occasion, but you tend to fall to your best level of preparation. So if you do a lot, get a lot of flying hours on the kind of stuff you're going to be doing in the Worlds, then stands to reason you ought to do better at it.
Yeah, I mean, when you're fishing against the Czechs and those guys are doing 16 and 17 pegged comps a year before a Worlds,
Yeah,
you know, at their level at home, which is really high. And I was talking to Martin Moosel once. I was actually the reserve in Italy, and he was the captain, and I was sat on the bank talking to him. And he said, a lot of our guys come to these Worlds and they view it as being easier than fishing one of our pegged comps at home because the
yeah,
level on average is lower, you
yeah.
know. That's what you're fishing
Well,
against.
I mean, a good few years ago now, but I'd heard that around at least 300 realistic aspirant people trying to get into, the Czech team. So, that's to get into the team sort of thing, and they're all, first among equals sort of thing. So that's it's a hell of a level of competition to rise through, like rising through murderer's row, isn't it, to get onto that team? I guess.
They're all really really good. No, I've been lucky. I've fished with quite a few of them, and
Mm,
they are really good. There's no doubt about that. Good anglers, and a lot of them are doing. If you look at the good anglers from the Spanish team and the ones from the Czech team and the ones from the French team, a lot of the stuff they're doing is very similar.
yeah, yeah. So just moving on a little bit. For many years, I guess we have a mantra of like dead drift being everything in lots of fly fishing. But I think in one of your recent videos, you talked a little bit about adding movement to your nymphs and that kind of thing. Just wondered if you could expand on that a little bit and the sorts of things, the tactics that you might do, and the difference that can make when you're presenting nymphs.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it in different ways. I mean, there's for me there's two kinds of fishing, right? So you've got pleasure fishing where you're fishing water that's not heavily pressured and it's maybe the fish haven't seen another angler for a day or two. And
Mm,
then you've got like the comp scenario for me sometimes I'm going on a section of water 2 hours behind another angler. And fish are weird things, and until we find a talking one, I've said it a few times, we'll never 100% know what's going on in their heads,
mm,
but a lot of people are obsessed with dead drift, even some really good anglers who think that, when the fish isn't eating it, it's because that drift isn't,
dead enough.
absolutely, totally dead enough. And a lot of the time, it's not that. They
Mm,
want some manipulation. They want the fly moved. So
mm,
a lot of my tactics for squeezing extra fish out involve angle changes and showing them the same fly in a slightly different way.
yeah.
And and that sometimes, I mean, I'll give you one quick story, but in Slovakia in 17 for the Worlds, I think it was, I was over the year before practicing with a good friend of mine, Eddie Donner, at the Italian team. He wasn't in the team for the year after, so we both went over to practice. And there was a lovely bit of water. River was poisoned with grayling. There was just so many of them. And I went through this one bit of water, I think 4 times, with 4 different methods. And the first 3 passes through this same section, I was getting like 1, 2, or 3, or whatever it was, but it wasn't any great shakes. And then I went through doing something that I'd seen in Poland it's got to be 17 years ago now, with a
Mm,
guy called Peter Konek, I think his second name. He's a real high level Polish competitor. Um, he'd showed me fishing 2 nymphs and letting it whip. So throwing it in, letting it dig, and then letting a pulley wheel form in the line and just letting it whip out.
mm,
And Eddie had been doing something similar with his European nymphing leader, allowing a pulley wheel to form and letting it whip. And we did that, and it was just an absolute joke. I mean, it was insane. I think I had 19 in the last pass, and I
mm,
fished it 3 times already. With a dead drift and induced take.
yeah.
I've been bouncing the dry. I'd done a few different things, and then I went in with 2 nymphs, letting them get in, and then letting it pulley wheel out, and just come whipping stupidly across the current. And I'd get 2 on at once.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, not even just grayling. I caught trout as well, and
I
it was just
think I think from what you said, I think there's a very convoluted description of something like that in Karol Krivanovich's book, and it's really hard to piece together from the description because it's in translation and it's hard to
yeah,
describe in words as well. But Yeah, it is amazing what, and like you say, giving them a different look at the same silhouette, it can completely change the prey image for that fish. It's like, I've, I think one of the things that I've latched onto is that idea that organized movement is a very reliable signal of life in prey for a fish. So if you only ever have those very inanimate sort of presentations, you can be lacking quite a key component for what they might actually recognize and trigger off that sort of feeding response, I think. So getting creative about doing, putting that into your flies, I think could be a massive game changer for sure. So I'm really interested to hear that story of yours, actually, that you could have 19 after going through it that many times, and
Yeah,
just
it was
changing
weird.
that thing.
It was. I mean, we were catching them two at a time every so often. We had
Yeah,
two or three double ups,
yeah.
which was just. Now you can argue, well, maybe something else changed
Mm.
in that time period. By the time you were on your fourth run through, had something started happening.
Yeah.
That's the other thing you'll never really know because I couldn't see anything. Nothing looked to my eye like it had changed.
Yeah.
But
I think the only way to do that is if you break it again, so it stops working, and then you switch back to the thing that was working. So you got to rule it. It's like a scientific thing. You're ruling out hypotheses rather than trying to find evidence to support what you think's going on.
yeah,
Fantastic. What was I going to ask you before I come up with something? Yes, that was it. You'd mentioned, I think this is in an article a while ago, but you'd mentioned, and this ties into what we were saying just before a little bit in terms of movement, in pressured waters where, people are used to using quite, let's say comp derived methods with fairly dense flies, and they've got quite a fast drop.
yeah.
Fish locking onto that fast drop as something that rather than it being attractive as they encounter it, it starts to be something that spooks them. And can you remember when you'd observed that, and what sort of led you on to, realizing that was a thing?
Um, yeah, I'd seen it a few times. Fishing pressured water down in the south again on the test fishing for grayling that see in stupid numbers of anglers, to be honest, and get caught a lot. I was seeing it down there, but I was in. It was only quite recently, really, where it really sort of got battered home, if you like. But I was in the Czech Republic in 14. Again, it was a world. We came third that year, actually, so we had a good result. But our guide was Vitmasar, and we were practicing one day on this really battered section of river because it was getting near the comp and all the other teams had arrived, and nobody's wandering too far from the base sort of hotel, and all the water's getting pressured. And we ended up with the entire England team in like one big long run. Now I think Phil Dixon found some coarse fish and caught a load of them on a dry with a nymph below it, something like that, in some backwater. I think Andrew Scott caught a load of perch out of some skinny water that people hadn't found. But there was this run that was prime. I mean, it was like perfect trout water, and we were all going down it like a conveyor belt, just trying to. And every two or three passes, one of us would get a trout, and Vit was sitting at the top of the run, just watching. And I thought, well, nobody's really talking to him, and nobody's really asked him any questions, so I'm just going to go and ask him, and say, look. So I went to him and I said, what's the story? Is this good? Are we doing, And he's a really nice guy, and he was like, yeah, you're doing all right, which was,
Damned by faint
polite.
praise there.
Yeah, it was like polite for no. This is really bad, So I just asked him. I just showed him what I was using and said, what do you think? And he just went, too heavy. And he just went in my box and he went down 2B sizes and given me. And I went in, and my God, it was just embarrassing.
So that actually just flagged up something just there when you said you were the person to go and actually say, look, what's the deal? I know that you're into your kickboxing, and I've sort of got an interest in a variety of martial arts, but I find that people that do that, they're much more willing to go, if you get caught with a particular technique, they're much happier to kind of put their ego to one side and say, oh, that was really interesting. What did you, show us what you did then. And I think that really can help, particularly when you're on other people's home turf and they obviously know it inside and out. But being willing to sort of say, yeah, what's the deal? I think that it gives you so much more potential to sort of improve and develop as an individual, so it's quite selfish in a way, but it's hard to do. I think people find it hard to get over that ego of actually admitting that maybe there is a better way, or that there's stuff to be learned.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been, like I said, I've been looking up. I've fished with so many good anglers and I'll be honest, I've had the arrogance bit sort of knocked out of me, because when you're competitive and you're into your competitive fishing, you've got to have self-confidence. But typically what happens is our old system used to deliver us all to world and European hopelessly ill-equipped to compete. And, I rocked up at one of my first worlds thinking, because I knew I could fish, thinking, I'm going to knock you all off the water, and you quickly realise that you're probably not, unless you start sucking things in from everybody else. And, when you've had a few kick-ins and, the French guy's gone on behind you and made you look silly, that's when you kind of learn.
I suspect that's one of the things that people don't necessarily appreciate about comp anglers and comp angling, is that to be in any kind of safe position, you have to you go into it knowing that you could get a real kick in and a real public sort of, failure, if you like. And people that think, oh, it's competitive and you're trying to out, I don't know, seeing it like that sort of aggressive, arrogant type thing, actually, you're going to have a messed up head if that's the way that you are. And you need to, people I think they do better to understand what it is to actually put yourself out there on the line and accept that you're going to be shot at and that you might come up short, but in the process, you're pushing things forward and you're developing, and like you say, putting that ego to one side is pretty much the first step to doing that and not going mental.
Yeah, that's a big. I mean, there's peg fishing. It doesn't matter how good you are. Peg fishing can make you look stupid.
Yeah.
Because things do change. It's like anything with fishing. Things do change. Flies hatch. Clouds drift over the sun. Fish get active. Fish move. I mean, in one of the competitions we're in, the fish moved into a couple of beats. They weren't even there. And they shifted because the fish were all migrating as it happened into a big lake. It was in Norway.
Turns out it's pretty difficult to catch them when they're not there, eh?
Yeah, and so you can't. I've had plenty of kick-ins, and I've handed out quite a lot of kick-ins as well in comps to other good anglers. And if you can't take it, you're not cut out for comp fishing, because
you've got to kind of treat them the same, haven't you? Because it's you on one day on that situation, another day it could be a different situation,
and it's down to consistency. And if you're charging about, with your head imploding because you've done badly in one session, you don't make it up in the next four.
Yeah.
So you've got to be prepared to have a bad session and then make up for it in the next 3 or 4 or whatever.
Yeah, I think you see it in a lot of sports. And you see tennis players that can't let go of that double fault or that previous point, and it screws them over for the rest of that. For going forward, and like you say, consistent and keep chipping away, whatever. Yeah. Fantastic. There was another thing. I was going to move on to sort of, there seems to be a little bit more within, let's say, the pleasure side of the market. There's a bit more acceptance and interest in some of that kind of refinement towards some of these leader off the water, finer, small, subtle nymphing techniques. Perhaps getting beyond that kind of heavy bugging type, mentality, and looking at some of these more comp-derived methods and stuff. I was interested. I heard you use a throwaway remark in one of your videos recently about some new rods that you just designed, and I just wondered about the sorts of characteristics that you put into those.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest now, and it's a double-edged sword, I think, because I think there's quite a few I'll say, what's the right word? There's quite a few capable river anglers out there now who, if you did take the French leader off them and the bead heads away, they'd be fumbling around in the dark.
You're going to struggle. Yeah.
I think there's unfortunately now it's become a default method for a lot of people because it is such a good method, but it's not always the best method. But that said, there is definitely more interest in longer, lighter rods. So I've just done some new ones for Hardy, which are typically much longer in length. We've got everything from 10 foot 8 inches, 11 foot, from like a zero, call it a 0 weight, but it's really just a very, very light action 1-2 weight.
Yeah.
And then right the way through 2s, 3s, and 4s. So, longer's not always better. Depends on the situation you're in, but the basic, premise of it is if the rod's longer, you've got that long, thin leader and you can fish it further, it's becoming a more effective tool for the job, basically.
Yeah. Cool beans. Well, thank you ever so much for passing on some of your, a small fraction of your obviously vast knowledge and experiences. I've really enjoyed just chatting through some of that stuff. It'd be lovely to think we could maybe go out on stream at some point and have a look at some stuff, and when we're a bit more mobile and more generally around the population and stuff. But certainly for now, I really thank you for sharing that with us, Howard, and
no
appreciate
bother.
your time.
No bother, anytime.
All right, mate. Take care.
Great.
See you soon.
Thanks a lot. Cheers, Paul.